Yesterday was a very wild day in the crypto market, but I have to say it planned out exactly the way we expected. And what I mean by that is we saw pumps, we saw major manipulation in the crypto market, we saw a lot of volatility, saw major liquidations across the space. And in fact, we're waiting now to see if there are any responses today, but ADA's kind of in a comfortable spot currently. And we returned back to prices that we were talking about potentially hitting just a few days ago. And we're going to talk about what today may look like, what happened to the tune of $500 million over the last 24 hours. So if you guys are new or haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below, hit that bell again. It's free to do. It'll keep you updated anytime there's new content live here on the channel. So looking at ADA, yeah, yesterday was a very wild day. If we're looking at just this day in totality, yes, it sucked. It was a big, ugly red daily candle. But let's look at some context from the day. We were down about 5.5%. ADA returned back to the same prices that we saw back on March 31st, which isn't really surprising. In fact, I talked about this, I think, in a few videos, but I talked about it in comments on Twitter as well. You know, a viewer was asking me, I wonder if this is already priced in. I said, you know, to yesterday's price, yes, which would be March 31st prices. Today prices, April 1st prices, I'm not sure, right? And again, the big surprise is today. We don't know what the responses from countries around the world to the US tariffs are going to be. We're going to talk about that just a little bit more later on. But really what got us down to these ranges was a lot of people playing games and trying to think that they were smarter than the market. This isn't surprising because this happens all the time. And what we saw was actually liquidations both directions. We saw liquidations to the upside in terms of ADA. We saw liquidations to the downsides in terms of ADA. And what this was huge manipulation across the crypto market. In fact, when we look across crypto in general, we're talking about $500 million over the last 24 hours. What I think was very interesting about this is BTC actually had more liquidations on the short side by almost double than it did the long side. And what we saw for ADA was about $4.18 million in liquidations, more obviously on the long side, almost almost a 3-to-1 ratio there. So what we're seeing is, you know, even though BTC had kind of a volatile day, the longs aren't really trying to push them the way that they are altcoins. Altcoins saw some of the largest liquidations across the crypto space. In fact, we look at when we look at Ethereum, it had this single largest liquidation to the tune of $11.97 million. So that would suck if that was you, obviously. But what we've started to see now is shorts are still remaining confident. Okay. There's more short interest that is set in above these levels that are continually trying to keep ADA and other assets throughout the space suppressed. And that is the recipe for another move to the upside. Now, this isn't to guarantee your financial advice or anything like that. Again, we're going to have to watch and wait and see, you know, what does US money do once it wakes up? Are there going to be other responses throughout the world? And first of all, there are some responses already. First of all, China is warning that US tariffs threaten global economic stability. We'll have to wait and see how the BRIC nations respond today in regards to these tariffs that were implemented. And frankly, these tariffs were not that bad. If you guys did actually look through the numbers, they're quite small. And frankly, when we're talking about the US, the big thing that they're trying to do is shift away from dependency. All right. The US has a major trade deficit. What that means is, obviously, for those that aren't familiar, the US imports way more than it exports. And what that means is that there is huge reliance on other countries throughout the world. And there's nothing wrong with trading with countries throughout the world. But the problem is when you're moving all your crap out of your country, when you're moving production out of your country, when you're relying on, you know, other countries throughout the world for food and clothing and stuff like that, that's what they're trying to get away from. And I think a lot of people say, or many people are thinking, oh yeah, it's going to lead to huge price increases. And it's really not, because a lot of production is still here in the US. And what this creates is a shift back towards US products, which frankly, they're not much more expensive. In fact, the cost of US products has shifted in a big way over the last 20 years. In fact, back in 2014, I believe the difference was between 5 and 6%. So it's pretty small. And you can start to understand what they're trying to do, right? Now, yes, there are products throughout the world that you can only get from other countries, and that's a different story entirely. And we'll wait and see how this all shakes out, because again, we have seen other responses from some of the largest trade nations in the world with the US, for example, Canada and Mexico, that have said, at least at the time of filming this video, that they're not going to respond with reciprocal tariffs. It's basically about evening the playing field, striking up trade deals, and basically making US production and US trade great again. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. I didn't mean to get political or go off on a tangent, but I really want people to understand what the thought process is behind this. Now, what we're again waiting to see what happens is one, those responses, but two, we're waiting to see if US money doesn't freak out today. All right. They shouldn't, because yesterday was frankly a big nothing burger. It wasn't that big of a deal. But sometimes people see this big, ugly red candle and they're like, oh, we're going to go lower. We have to go lower. I'm going to sell. I'm going to dump. And that's where a lot of people get caught. So that's what we need to prepare for today. Watch for people acting emotional, acting irrational, like they have many times before. Back here, back here, back here. I mean, there's so many times where people just freak out and dump their bags and just make horrible decisions. And, people can always do what they want, but understand that things are progressing. What we've really eliminated in a big way over the last 24 hours was uncertainty. And why I'm saying that is there were so many questions about what this would look like, how big the tariffs would be, what countries they would be imposed on. And now we have clarity. The market hates uncertainty and it loves clarity. I think that this is the perfect setup for a strong bounce in crypto, whether it's from these prices, whether it's from prices a little bit lower. Who knows? We'll have to wait again and see when everything calms down. We did surge in volume over the last 24 hours, $131 billion. It's the highest volume we've seen since like March 11th, March 12th. So things are getting active in crypto again. It's a question of which direction does the wind carry us. So I appreciate you guys as always. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts below, but have a great day. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.